Let's start with the number that should stop you cold. World number 32. That's where Eala walked into the All England club 2 weeks ago. And by the time she walked out, the projection had her at world number 28. 4 spots. On paper, that sounds like a nice little bump. A good tournament, pat on the back, moving on. Except that's not the story. The story is who got her there. Eala didn't just have a good run at Wimbledon. She beat Iga Swiatek, the defending champion, the world no. 2-3. On center court, in a third-round match that went to a tiebreak nobody will forget. 7-6 in the first, 6-2 in the second. And here's the part that should really stop you. That's not even the first time she's done this. Back in Miami in 2025, as a wild card, she took down Swiatek too. Same player. Different year, different surface, same result. Added up, and her career record against top 10 opponents now sits at 7 wins, 4 losses. That's not an upset. Full stop. That's a matchup. She's figured out how to win. Now here's where the American sports fan brain usually goes with this. We love a Cinderella story. Low seed, nobody saw her coming. She catches fire for 2 weeks and rides adrenaline all the way to a career-best finish. And then the pumpkin turns back into a carriage. That's the template. That's how we're wired to watch a run like this. But that template doesn't actually fit here, and the numbers tell you why. Eala wasn't some unseeded long shot sneaking through a soft draw. She was the 29th seed, the first Filipina player ever seeded at a Grand Slam, period. The tour already had her flagged as someone who could do damage. So the real question isn't how did an underdog get hot? The real question is, was this a breakout moment? Or is it the visible tip of something that's been building for a while now, quietly, away from the cameras? Quick context, because you need to know who we're talking about. Eala is 21, from Quezon City in the Philippines, and she's been grinding on tour since she was 14 years old. On how the ITF circuit, the lower-tier tournaments most fans never watch, where careers actually get built. She's the first player from her country to reach the second week of a major, the first to be seeded at 1. This is uncharted territory for Philippine tennis, and she's the one drawing the map. So let's frame the real question this video is built around, because everything from here forward is going to try to answer it. Is Eala's Wimbledon run a peak, a great 2 weeks, that regression is coming for, or is it a pattern? Is this the moment a level up became visible, or the moment a level up happened to line up with a Grand Slam and a TV camera? Here's the thing about patterns. You can't spot them by looking at one tournament. One great week proves you can get hot. It doesn't prove you've changed. To actually test whether this is structural, whether the ranking climb is earned and sustainable, not a lucky draw dressed up as a breakthrough, you have to rewind past Wimbledon. You have to look at what she was doing in the months before anybody outside tennis circles was paying attention. The grass season she quietly put together. The wins that didn't get a center court spotlight. Because if the same skill was showing up in smaller rooms before it showed up in the biggest one, that's your answer. That's where we're headed next. Not another recap of what happened on center court. You already know the headline. What matters now is the 6 months of unglamorous tennis that made that headline possible in the first place. Here's the thing nobody puts in the highlight reel. Patterns don't show up on center court first. They show up in the small rooms. So let's go there. Rewind to Miami, 2025. Eala is a wild card, meaning she didn't even earn direct entry. Someone handed her a spot, and she goes on a run that gets her to the semifinals of a WTA 1-1000 event, the tour's second highest tier. Along the way, she beats world number 5 Madison Keys. Then she beats world number 2 Iga Swiatek, back-to-back top 10 wins, as a wild card, at a tournament most of the tennis world wasn't watching her for. That result is what first put her inside the top 100. Before that week, she wasn't even a name casual fans would recognize. After it, she was a first-round seed watch. Now here's why that Miami result matters more than people give it credit for. It wasn't grass, it was hard court. Which tells you something important. Whatever she was doing to beat Swiatek wasn't a grass-specific trick. It traveled across surfaces. That's going to matter in a minute. From there, trace the rest of 2025. A final at Eastbourne. A first WTA 125 title in Guadalajara. A year-end ranking of number 50. A career high at the time. None of that is Grand Slam glamour. Those are the reps. The unglamorous tournaments where a player either proves a breakout was real or quietly slides back to where she was before. Eala didn't slide back. She built on top of it. Then look at 2026, specifically the stretch right before Wimbledon, because this is the part that gets skipped when people frame her run as a shock. She went 12-4 on grass this season, 12 wins, 4 losses. On a surface where the entire major tournament season is basically a few weeks long, meaning that record isn't padded by volume, it's concentrated. High-stakes tennis. She won a second WTA 125 title, this one in Birmingham. She made the semi-finals in Berlin. By the time she stepped onto Wimbledon's grounds, she wasn't walking in cold off a hot streak. She was walking in off a stretch of matches where she'd already been beating good players, just not in front of the cameras that matter to casual fans. That's the piece that reframes everything. The Cinderella framing assumes the good tennis started when the TV lights came on. The data says the good tennis had already been happening for months. Wimbledon didn't create the level. Wimbledon revealed it. Now let's talk about the ranking curve itself, because this is where you can actually see the shape of the improvement instead of just hearing about it. In 2024, her career high ranking was number 143. That's a solid tour player, not yet a name. By the end of 2025, that number was number 50, a career high again. Now, midway through 2026, she's projected at number 28, another career high. 3 separate years, 3 separate career highs, each one roughly having the distance to the top. If you plotted that as a line, it wouldn't look like a spike. It would look like a slope. And a slope that consistent is worth reading as compounding progress rather than a hot streak that happened. To coincide with a big stage, though, that reading is an interpretation of the shape of the climb, not a guaranteed forecast of what comes next. So if the results are the effect, what's the actual cause? This is where you have to be careful, not to just point at, "She's good now," and call it analysis. Because that's not an explanation. That's a restatement of the scoreline. Eala herself has pointed at something more specific. After the Wimbledon run, she talked about how tennis at this level often comes down to fine margins, 1 or 2 points, in a tight match, and about learning to handle pressure instead of getting swallowed by it. That's her own read on it, not a stat. So take it as her stated perspective rather than a proven mechanism. But it lines up with what the results actually show. Her signature wins haven't come in blowouts. They've come in tiebreaks, in 3-setters, in the moments where a match could tip either direction, and somebody has to be the one who doesn't blink. The tiebreak against Swiatek at Wimbledon went to extra points before she closed it. That's not raw power showing up. That's composure showing up, repeatedly, against exactly the kind of opponent built to make you fold. Now, the honest pushback. Because a real thesis has to survive the obvious counterargument. Grass is a strange, small sample on tour, just a handful of tournaments a year, on a surface that behaves differently than anything else players see. So is this a grass-specific hot streak that happened to land on the sport's biggest stage, or is it something more general about where her game is right now? This is exactly why the Miami result from over a year earlier carries so much weight in this argument. That win over Swiatek happened on a hard court, not grass. Different bounce, different rally length, different demands on movement and shot selection. If the Wimbledon breakthrough were purely a grass court fluke, you wouldn't expect to see the same signature result, a top 2 win, decided by nerve in the tight moments, show up on a completely different surface more than a year earlier. But it did. That's the detail that turns hot streak on one surface into a skill that travels. Put all of it together. and the picture stops looking like a single great fortnight and starts looking like a career on a defined upward slope, with the surface changing but the core competitive trait winning the moments that actually decide matches staying constant. Which raises the obvious next question. If this really is a pattern and not a peak, the next real test isn't another grass event, because grass is basically done for the season. The real test is what happens when she moves onto hard courts, into the part of the calendar where American audiences will be watching her most closely, heading toward the tournament where she first broke through it all. So here's where the story actually goes next, and it's not Wimbledon anymore. That chapter is closed. The next chapter is the American hard court swing, and this is the part that turns everything we just laid out from a nice narrative into an actual, testable claim. Eala is set to open her hard court season at the Wimbledon DC Open in Washington, D.C. Before the tour heads toward the U.S. Open, pay attention to that detail, because it's not incidental. The U.S. Open is the exact tournament where she first broke into the tour-level record books, back when she reached the second round in just her second professional appearance there. So this isn't a fresh start on unfamiliar ground. It's a return to the stage where this whole climb technically began, except now she's walking in with a Grand Slam quarterfinal caliber run behind her instead of ahead of her. Here's why that stretch matters more than anything that happened in London. Wimbledon proved she could do it on grass, under pressure, against the best player on the planet. But we already established that grass is a small, quirky sample. The hard court swing is the surface where the tour spends most of its calendar, where the bulk of ranking points get earned, and not for nothing where American crowds will be watching her most closely all summer. If the pattern from part 2 is real, this is where it shows up again. Not as a guarantee, as a prediction that's actually on the record now, ready to be checked against results in real time. It's worth a quick comparison here, because American sports fans have seen this shape before, just in other sports. A young athlete puts together a run that looks like lightning in a bottle, gets the highlight package, her time is now headlines, and then the next season either confirms it or quietly erases it. The names change, the story doesn't. What separates the ones who stick from the ones who fade usually isn't the signature win itself. It's whether the underlying process, the reps, the composure in tight moments, the results in tournaments nobody was clipping for social media, was already there before the big moment happened. We just spent part 2 establishing that Eala's underlying process was already there. That's the whole case for betting on more of this, rather than treating Wimbledon as the ceiling. Which brings us to the phrase sitting in the title of this video: the Eala era begins. Here's the honest read on that line. Right now, it's a headline, not a verdict. It's earned in the sense that the climb 143 to 50 to a projected 28, across 3 separate years, with a top 10 win record that now sits at 7-4 is real, and it is on the record. But an era isn't confirmed by one Grand Slam 4th-round run, no matter how many history-making firsts came with it. It gets confirmed by what happens over the next few hard-court events, when the cameras are smaller, the stakes are more routine, and there's no home crowd surge on center court to ride. If the results from Washington through Flushing Meadows look anything like the composure we saw against Swiatek, then the phrase stops being a marketing line and starts being an accurate description. If they don't, then Wimbledon was still historic, just not yet an era. So here's the takeaway to carry into whatever match of hers, or honestly anyone's breakout run, you watch next. Don't get seduced by the signature win by itself. A great 2 weeks tells you a player can get hot. What actually tells you whether a ranking jump is real is whether you can go back 6 months, a year, further, and find the same skill showing up in smaller rooms, against smaller expectations, without anyone watching. Eala's climb passes that test right now. Whether it keeps passing, it is the thing worth actually tuning back in for.